Imagine walking into a bar with your friends on a Friday night. You're laughing, having a good time, completely unaware that in just a few hours you'll vanish into thin air. Not from a dark alley, not from a deserted road, but from a crowded bar with security cameras watching every exit and hundreds of witnesses around you. This is exactly what happened to Brian Shaffer on April 1st, 2006, and to this day, nobody knows how he disappeared. This is the story of a mystery so impossible, it defies all logic. Welcome to Cold Trail. Brian Randall Shaffer was 27 years old in the spring of 2006. He wasn't just any college student. Brian was a second-year medical student at Ohio State University, studying to become a doctor. Friends described him as intelligent, friendly, and reliable. The kind of person who always showed up when he said he would. The kind of person who had his whole life ahead of him. But Brian had been through a difficult time. Just 1 month before his disappearance, his mother, Renee, had passed away after a battle with cancer. Brian had been incredibly close to her. Her death hit him hard, but he was coping. He had a girlfriend, Alexis Wagner, whom he loved deeply. In fact, Brian was planning to propose to her. He'd already looked at engagement rings. He had spring break coming up where he and Alexis planned to vacation in Miami. Life was moving forward, despite the grief. On the night of March 31st, 2006, Brian decided to go out with friends to unwind. It was the night before spring break, just one night of fun before the trip. Nobody could have imagined it would be the last time anyone would see him. That Friday evening, Brian met up with his friend William Florence, known as Clint, to go bar hopping around campus. The plan was simple: hit a few bars, have some drinks, celebrate the start of spring break. They started the night at a bar called the Arena District around 9 p.m., grabbing beers and catching up. At some point during the night, they ran into another friend, a guy named Meredith Reed. The three of them decided to continue the night together. Around midnight, they made their way to a popular bar and music venue called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. It was located on the second floor of a building near campus, right above a restaurant. The place was packed that night. It was the weekend before spring break, and college students filled every corner of the bar. Security cameras captured Brian, Clint, and Meredith entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona at 1:15 a.m. on April 1st. The footage shows Brian wearing a light-colored button-up shirt and jeans. He looked happy, relaxed, just another college kid enjoying a night out. Inside, the bar was loud, crowded, and chaotic. Music blared from speakers, people danced, drank, and shouted conversations over the noise. For the next 2 hours, Brian and his friends stayed at the Ugly Tuna, drinking and socializing. Brian even called his girlfriend Alexis twice during the night. She was out with friends herself. They talked briefly, made plans to meet up later. Everything seemed completely normal, but as the night wore on, something impossible was about to happen. Around 1:40 a.m., Brian told Clint he was going to talk to two young women he'd seen near the bar. Clint watched as Brian approached them and started chatting. This would be the last time Clint saw his friend. At approximately 1:55 a.m., the bar announced last call. The Ugly Tuna would be closing soon, and everyone needed to finish their drinks. Security footage from the bar's entrance captured Brian at 1:55 a.m. He's seen talking briefly to the two women near the entrance outside the bar in the hallway. The camera shows Brian and the women having a friendly conversation for a few moments. Then, the women walk away, heading toward the escalator to leave. And here's where it gets strange. The camera shows Brian turning around and walking back toward the bar entrance. He appears to be re-entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona. And then, he's just gone. That grainy security footage of Brian turning back toward the bar is the last confirmed sighting of him ever. Meanwhile, Clint and Meredith assumed Brian had either gone home or gone to meet up with Alexis. They didn't think much of it. Friends split up at bars all the time. They left the Ugly Tuna around 2 a.m. and went their separate ways. But Brian never made it home. He never called Alexis back. He simply vanished. When Brian didn't show up the next day, people started to worry. Alexis tried calling him repeatedly. No answer. His father, Randy Shaffer, couldn't reach him either. And by Sunday, April 2nd, Brian's father reported him missing to the Columbus police. And that's when investigators discovered something that would turn this case into one of the most baffling mysteries in modern history. The Ugly Tuna Saloona, the last place Brian was seen, is located on the second floor of a building. There's only one public entrance and exit to the bar, a single doorway that leads to an escalator, and that doorway was covered by security cameras. Police reviewed every single frame of footage from that night. They watched everyone who entered the bar. They watched everyone who left. Brian Shaffer's clearly seen entering at 1:15 a.m., but he is never seen leaving. How is that possible? Police thought maybe he'd used a back exit, a service entrance, or a fire escape. But here's the thing. The Ugly Tuna did have a service entrance for employees and deliveries, but it led to a construction area that was completely locked off that night. There was no way out through there. The only other exit was a fire escape, but it had an alarm that would sound if opened. The alarm never went off that night. Investigators were baffled. They searched the bar from top to bottom. They checked every corner, every storage room, every closet. They searched the construction area. They even checked the building's roof. There was no trace of Brian. It was as if he'd walked back into the bar and simply ceased to exist. The Columbus Police Department launched a massive investigation. They interviewed hundreds of people who'd been at the Ugly Tuna that night. They talked to bartenders, bouncers, customers, anyone who might have seen something. But nobody remembered seeing Brian leave. Nobody remembered anything unusual happening. Police brought in search dogs. The dogs traced Brian's scent to the front entrance of the bar. But then the trail just ended. They couldn't pick up his scent anywhere else in the building or outside. It was as if Brian had evaporated into thin air. Helicopters with heat-sensing equipment flew over the area. Dive teams searched nearby bodies of water. Volunteers combed through parks and wooded areas. Nothing. Detectives also looked into Brian's personal life. Was he depressed after his mother's death? Could he have harmed himself? But everyone who knew Brian insisted he was moving forward with his life. He had a girlfriend he loved. He was planning a proposal. He had a trip to Miami booked. His bank accounts and credit cards showed no activity after that night. His cell phone went straight to voicemail and was never used again. Could he have run away and started a new life? It seemed unlikely. Brian had no reason to disappear. He hadn't withdrawn large amounts of money. He hadn't packed any belongings. His car was still parked near his apartment. And perhaps most importantly, Brian was extremely close to his father. Friends said there was no way Brian would put his father through the pain of not knowing what happened to him, especially so soon after losing his wife. Police began to consider darker possibilities. Had Brian been abducted? Murdered? But how could someone kidnap a man from a crowded bar without anyone noticing? And how could they remove him from the building without being caught on camera? One theory emerged that seemed almost plausible. That night, a band had been performing at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. After the bar closed, the band packed up their equipment and left through the service entrance. The construction area that had been locked off, the band had access to it because they needed to move their heavy gear out of the building. Could Brian have left with the band? Maybe he helped them carry equipment, or maybe he simply walked out with them, hidden among the group and their gear. Police tracked down the band members and questioned them extensively. They all denied seeing Brian or having any interaction with him. Their stories checked out, and investigators found no evidence linking them to Brian's disappearance, but the theory persists among amateur sleuths to this day. Some people believe Brian could have been hidden in a large equipment case or somehow left with the band without their knowledge. However, there's no evidence to support this, and it raises more questions than it answers. Why would Brian leave with a band? Where would he have gone? And why hasn't he or his body ever been found? As the investigation dragged on with no leads, attention turned to Brian's friend Clint Florence, the last person known to have seen him. Clint cooperated with police initially, giving statements and answering questions, but when investigators asked him to take a polygraph test, Clint refused. He also stopped cooperating with the investigation and hired a lawyer. This raised immediate suspicions. Why would an innocent person refuse a polygraph and lawyer up? Online communities and amateur detectives began pointing fingers at Clint. Some theorized that Clint knew more than he was saying. Others suggested he might have been involved in Brian's disappearance. But here's the thing. Refusing a polygraph and hiring a lawyer doesn't mean someone is guilty. It means they're being smart. Polygraphs are notoriously unreliable and aren't admissible in court. Any lawyer would advise their client not to take one. Police thoroughly investigated Clint. They found no evidence whatsoever connecting him to Brian's disappearance. No motive, no opportunity, nothing. Clint has maintained his innocence for nearly 2 decades. Brian's father, Randy, has publicly stated he doesn't believe Clint had anything to do with his son's disappearance. Still, the cloud of suspicion has followed Clint ever since, a harsh reminder of how quickly public opinion can turn against someone in a high-profile case. Over the years, countless theories have emerged about what happened to Brian Shaffer. Some are plausible, others venture into the realm of the bizarre. Let's look at a few. Theory 1. Brian fell or was pushed into the construction area, and his body was accidentally sealed behind walls or concrete. Construction workers were renovating parts of the building at the time. Could Brian's body be entombed somewhere in that building? Police used ground-penetrating radar and searched extensively. They found nothing, but some people still believe he's hidden somewhere in the structure. Theory 2, Brian was murdered and his body was removed from the bar, hidden inside equipment cases or garbage bags, but this would require careful planning and multiple people involved. There's no evidence of any such conspiracy. Theory 3, Brian voluntarily disappeared to start a new life. Maybe the grief over his mother's death was too much. Maybe he felt overwhelmed by medical school and expectations, but this theory doesn't hold up well. Brian left behind everything, his wallet, his ID, his car, and he never accessed his bank accounts again. Starting a new life without identification or money is nearly impossible. Theory 4, and this is darker, Brian was the victim of foul play by someone at the bar. Perhaps someone drugged him, waited for an opportunity, and abducted him. But again, how would they get him out of the building without being seen on camera? And who would want to harm Brian? Police found no enemies, no one with a motive to hurt him. The truth is, none of these theories fully explain the impossible circumstances of Brian's disappearance. Every scenario has holes. Every explanation raises new questions. Today, nearly 2 decades later, Brian Shaffer remains missing. His case is still open. His father, Randy, never stopped searching for answers. Randy passed away in 2008, never knowing what happened to his son. Before his death, he did something heartbreaking and hopeful. He kept Brian on his cell phone plan and kept paying the bill. Just in case. Just in case Brian ever turned his phone back on. Just in case there was a signal, a sign, anything. Brian would be in his mid-40s now. If he's alive, he's lived an entire life somewhere in secret. If he's not, someone out there knows what happened. Someone always knows. The case of Brian Shaffer remains one of the most confounding disappearances in American history. A man walked into a bar and never walked out, despite every exit being monitored. The trail went cold that night at the Ugly Tuna Saloona. But the question remains, so burning as bright today as it did in 2006. Where is Brian Shaffer? If you have any information about this case, please contact the Columbus Police Department. Someone, somewhere knows something, and Brian's family deserves answers. This is Cold Trail. Subscribe for more unsolved mysteries and cold cases. Until next time.
Thanks for watching.